Ian, you are the CEO of the World Cement Association. You're the largest independent organization that works globally on behalf of the cement and clinker industry and its stakeholders. With offices in London and Beijing, the majority of WC members are cement producers, ranging from the world's largest organizations to some of the smallest. You also represent companies across the wider value chain, including specialist engineering firms, equipment suppliers, and tech providers. Is that right? How many members do you actually have, Ian?
Yes, you described it very well. Thanks,
Thank
Alice.
you. Straight from your side.
So we have just over 80 members. So they're cement companies, they're engineering companies, they're technology providers. So they cover, if you like, not just the cement producers, but the whole industry stakeholders, really. And the big challenge for the cement industry is decarbonization, and we're one of the hard to abate sectors, possibly the hardest to abate sector, because of the CO2 that's generated in the process. So that comes from the limestone, which is the raw material, and that breaks down into calcium oxide and CO2 in the kiln. So the problem of decarbonization is one that the industry has been addressing for 20 years or so. And we've made a reduction of about 20% in the emissions per ton of cement. But we're still responsible for about 7% of global CO2 emissions. So it's a very substantial amount and a very difficult challenge. You know, historically, we've had levers that have enabled us to reduce CO2, which include energy efficiency using alternative fuels, and reducing the proportion of cement that's made with clinker, which is the main culprit in terms of CO2 emissions. And we think we can go a bit further with those. Maybe we can get another 20 or 30% reduction using those traditional levers. But we still have the remaining, say, 70% to go. And that 70% needs new technologies, essentially carbon capture and utilization, or carbon capture and storage technologies, to continue to reduce the impact of cement. And I think one of the things that's very exciting for us now is that we can see that with some of these new technologies, there's the potential for concrete as a building material. So cement is generally used in concrete, and concrete is what what the construction industry uses. There's a potential for concrete to become carbon negative instead of carbon positive. So we can turn the whole cement and concrete industry from being a problem to being a solution. Now we're some way away, to put it mildly. We're some way away from having that technology and that capability, but we can see how it might be possible now. So it's quite an exciting time. And a lot of the new technology, in fact, most of the new technology, is not coming from within the industry. It's coming from outside the industry, mainly from startups, a lot of them coming from different universities around the world. And so that's why we try to spread the umbrella to all of the stakeholders, not just the cement producers.
Yeah, and you've openly developing a partnership program specifically to explore these areas, aren't you, with other NGOs and academics?
Yes, yeah. So we have as you say, a climate partnership program where we try to link up with other NGOs who are involved in decarbonization, and the part of it that we're particularly interested in, of course, is things that can directly be applied in the cement and concrete industries.
Yeah, and do you have a sense of time frame? Ian, obviously the increasing pressure around speed of change and decarbonization. Have you got a sense of how long it's going to take to actually genuinely shift, not just the cement industry, but I guess it's the entire value chain and around building and construction? There are so many moving parts in this system.
Yeah, I think if you sort of project it forward, then it looks as if it's going to take a very long time. You know, so we've made 20% progress over 20 odd years, and most of the projections are that it gets harder. You know, and so even if we look at commitments that some of the major companies in the sector have made to get to zero by 2050, the targets, the interim targets that have been set, assume that the next 10 years will make less progress, and then we'll make more progress later. So I think if you look at it from that standpoint, you say, well, how could you be sure you can make any progress quicker than this? But I think if we look at it from another standpoint, and we say, well, if we look at the technology, what is stopping this technology from being adopted? You know, so part of it is scale up, and there are some specific limitations, you know, to particular technologies. But a lot of it is economics. You know, so as we start to see carbon prices that even at the current levels in the UK or in Europe, you know, the sort of 50 euro type of a level, that will allow the economics of some of these new technologies to be more widely applicable. So you might say, okay, well, this particular technology could work in this specific city where aggregate prices are very high and where there's a ready source of this or that raw material. Yeah. So, but you know, with the carbon price, then maybe it's not just that city, but quite a number of other somewhat similar ones. And so you can see already that the current level of carbon pricing, if it's more broadly applied, and that's perhaps one of the issues, it can have an impact in accelerating change. So I'm quite optimistic that we'll do better than the current projections suggest.
Yeah. And in terms of yourselves as an association, where is the majority of your time in terms of changing the sector? Are you driving more sort of top up sort of policy activity, or you act proactively engaging with your members on what changes they need to implement to accelerate this process?
Yeah, so there are a number of things that we're trying to do. So one of them, the style of the organization is very much to try to help members in a practical way. So generally speaking, for a global association, it's quite hard to think about lobbying activities because obviously it's different in each jurisdiction. So we tend to focus more on the practical things that people can do to improve their operations. And we're currently working on I don't want to call it a roadmap because it's really a different idea from other roadmaps. So the roadmaps in the cement sector, there's a lot of roadmaps produced by all sorts of organizations, many of them very well-known organizations. And they chart out a course that we all broadly agree on. But there's a big chunk of it, maybe 2/3 or 60% at least, that is other technologies. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's I mean, that's undoubtedly true. But the question is, okay, well, how can we move forward with those? Now, what we're in the process of trying to develop is a tool that will help our members to assess which of those technologies are worth them investigating in detail for their specific circumstances. Because one of the things that is changing is that today, if you were building a cement plant anywhere in the world, it would look pretty similar. You know, that it's really a universal technology, not 100% true, but nearly true. But if we look going forward, then I think the decarbonization part of it will be more local specific. You know, you have to have particular resources available. I mean, for example, you know, hydrogen might be a fuel that you could use in some specific locations where they have a network and hydrogen's available, green hydrogen or blue hydrogen at a low cost, but it might not be an option everywhere. But there are a lot of examples like that where you need specific materials or availability of you know, logistics, whatever. So we're trying to build a tool that will help companies, not so much in the areas, the traditional areas everybody understands pretty well, but in these new areas to figure out what it's worth pursuing. So it's a sort of adjunct to a roadmap, if you like. It's okay, so the roadmap charts out the industry course, but you know, how do you actually make progress in this new area? So that's one of the things that we do. And then more broadly, we try to promote policies that are helpful to accelerate change. And so those would include carbon pricing. They would include procurement policy, particularly public procurement. You know, a lot of cement and concrete is procured by governments around the world. And there are opportunities for them to pursue policies that encourage development of green products. And then I think a really key area is in developing internationally recognized standards for calculating the embodied carbon footprint, in particular of concrete. Yeah. Because there's a lot of, it sounds simple in principle, but when you get down to the details of how you count it, you know, there are a lot of, okay, well, you could treat it this way, you could treat it that way. And that can make quite a substantial difference.
And how far away from the international standards are we? Is it on the horizon, or is it far more complex than that?
No, I think it is on the horizon. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to some decisions about. So, for example, if you're producing concrete with slag from a steel mill, then how do you calculate the embodied carbon in the slag? Mm-hmm. There's not really a right or a wrong. It's a question of, okay, what is going to be the protocol for doing that? I mean, clearly, whether you use the slag or not, the carbon is emitted. So on the one hand, you could say, well, there's no carbon associated with the slag; it's all associated with the steel. But then, you know, is that a reasonable way of doing it? You've got other ways of producing steel that you produce less slag. So, you know, there's this kind of issue as to, particularly on these byproducts, how do you calculate the associated carbon footprint?
Yeah. Ian, can we have a quick conversation about your own journey internally and what the association's starting to do? I know that you obviously joined Climate Action for Associations a while back now, but in terms of your own roadmap to change. So if you could just give those that are listening in an idea of how many staff you are and what your sort of approach to transition is internally, that would be great.
Yeah, okay, sure. Well, we have 4 staff in the UK and 4 in China, so we're 8 total. The interesting thing, I think, is the impact that COVID has had. So prior to COVID, we had almost all of our operations all of our events and so forth were face-to-face. So it involved a lot of travel. And of course, so for example, we'd organize member forums, which would involve a plant visit where we pick a particular topic. You know, maybe this plant exemplifies good practice. You go and see it, you go and discuss it, and people can learn about the topic. But actually doing this virtually has turned out to be rather successful because it allows members all around the world to attend these events without having to travel. It only takes, you know, half a day of their time instead of half a week. So it's really remarkably efficient. Now, it's not quite the same as actually, you know, being there and seeing the plant, but, you know, so it swings and roundabouts. I'm sure we will continue after COVID with in-person events, but I think virtual events will become the core of what we do. You know, virtual events and other activities managed virtually, such as benchmarking. So one of the things that we started last year was a multi-company benchmarking and performance improvement program, and we had originally planned that prior to COVID, so that would consist of a lot of plant visits, but of course we were able to do that with, you know, Zoom calls and collecting the information. And okay, you miss something, you know, you miss something by not being able to go to the plant. But actually, you can do really a lot without having to travel. And I think those kind of activities will become 90% virtual, 10% face-to-face, and then the effectiveness of the face-to-face portion will be much higher because you'll really focus on key topics. So I think that the main change over the last year or so has been thinking about how to adapt to, you know, through COVID and then in a post-COVID world.
Yeah, I think that's fairly common across our entire network. Is obviously the impact, the one of the positive impacts that obviously the the effect of the pandemic has had on associations is almost like that forced, something that they were always thinking about, but that forced digital events scenario. And now most of the network are thinking digital first and physical as a second. I guess in terms of your own unique requirement around plant visits, etc., other associations that we work with are now starting to introduce really other technologies as well, like virtual reality and augmented reality, and being able to have that sort of complete 360 viewpoint as well. So again, technology is really, as well as obviously the fact that we're able to do this, and I'm in Australia and you're in the UK, is remarkable. But even more and more, I think we're going to find that the footprint of associations is going to be increasingly reduced, because the reliance on physical events is going to get less and less.
Yeah, no, virtual reality and this sort of remote presence kind of technology is very, very interesting. Really we've run one event where we use that, but the issue that we have is that a lot of cement plants are in fairly remote locations, and many of them don't have very good internet connections. So that has actually been a bit of a challenge in running some of those. But I mean, clearly that's something that we can overcome in time. So virtual events, we had an open day last month, and in October 20th, 21st, we're going to have our annual conference, which will be virtual. So last year we didn't organize a conference. The year before we had it in Shanghai, and this year we decided, well, we should go ahead and clearly people can't travel freely yet, so it makes sense to do it virtually. I think the hybrid events are a little difficult, though. The challenge with the hybrid events is that the participation of the people who are there in person is obviously quite different from the people who are calling in. So maybe you get something by calling in, but the reason people go to in-person events is primarily networking. It's not really to see the presentations. We pretend it's to see the presentations, and we work hard to get great presentations. But people really want to come and meet people. So I think it will tend to go one way or the other. I'm sure there'll be a place for hybrid as well, but I think it will tend to be one or the other.
I mean, we're working with some associations that are actually taking a really unique approach to a hybrid event, and we can easily connect you with them, so you can have a conversation around what's working and what isn't, but it certainly is. But in terms of implementing your own action plan internally and setting targets and moving towards them, have you got a sense of, because I know you're quite early in that process, have you got a sense of when you're likely to sort of formalize an internal sort of strategy around this?
Well, we're hoping we have our General Assembly of all of our members in December, and I hope that we'll have a policy that we can present to them, and hopefully that they will approve in December. And that policy will include members setting targets, as well as the association putting forward targets that are or milestones, let's say, that are consistent with the STBI.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. Well, it's been great to talk to you, Ian.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too. I'm wondering if you could perhaps leave some last nuggets around, because obviously I think there may be some people listening into this, and obviously we're going to be streaming this after as well. I think the interesting thing is, and I've just come off a call with a climate group talking about big systems and industry change and transition. It's just that there's just so many moving parts to it. And I guess there might be a lot of associations that are listening to this thinking, well, actually, Ian, the WCA is firmly entrenched in an industry, a part of the system that is obviously right in the center of one of the biggest emitting industries. For an association that isn't, I guess, or is considered not to be in the heart of, you know, the culprit, I guess, of emissions, have you got any advice to them around, you know, as an association, how to potentially go about thinking about change and how to implement that change?
Yeah, I think that you're right. We've, as an industry, we've been thinking about this for 20 years, probably long before most industries had to worry about it. So it is a different situation. But whether we talk about change that's related to the climate emergency, or whether we talk about change that's related to other matters, there has to be some recognition initially of why change is necessary and the destination we're trying to get to. So I think for all industries, the associations can start by thinking about, you know, why do we need to change, and what does our future look like? And if you can get buy-in from your members on that, then I think it's a path that you can pursue. So I think starting with that vision of the future and getting alignment on that vision of the future is really where I would suggest you start the whole process.
Yeah, and responsible business, I think, fundamentally is, yeah, and how climate change and business sustainability is one in the same ultimately, and these things need to be integrated into an association's overarching planning and future, and I guess the long-term sustainability of the membership organisation as well, rather than it being a bolt-on. I think action needs to be started to take from the business strategy and business planning perspective. Would you agree with that?
So I think that the things that are relevant to different industries are different. You could say all of us could take all of the SDGs and try and figure out, you know, what we can do. You know, and if you talk about SDGs, so for example, one of the SDGs that we would have some impact in is biodiversity or water. And so the question is, you know, are you better off having a broader you know, a broader set of targets, or do you focus? And I think it depends. It depends on your specific situation. So in our situation, you know, we decided that it's quite clear that CO2 is such an overwhelming issue for us that we shouldn't risk distracting people or even creating resistance by worrying about the others, and we should really focus on that. But in a different situation, you might say, okay, well, that's just one of the issues we should focus on, and we should also be concerned about, you know, whatever it is, biodiversity or inclusion or education or whatever. So I think, you know, every industry has to weigh that up and has to come to some assessment of where it can really make an impact in the sustainability of business going forward. And as you say, for some industries, the greenhouse gas emissions are not particularly important. You know, they're not a significant emitter, but maybe they have other issues. I mean, it could be labor issues or other sustainability issues.
Yeah, skills and ethics. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ian, thank you so much again for your time.
Always a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to speak to you. And yeah, I will speak to you soon, I'm sure. And thanks everyone for tuning in to today's critical conversation as part of London Climate Action Week. Thanks, Ian.
Good luck with the rest of your Climate Action Week. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.